your host, New Fatora, and this is the podcast where I discuss the best stories with the best minds in the community. On this episode, I'll be discussing Feeling the Fire Until It Burns by Nicely Done. With me, I have Hans Gutherson. Thank you for joining me.
So glad to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, especially to discuss one of my favorite stories. Oh, and
Amazing.
another absolute classic by Nicely Done.
Mm,
So, for a summary, uh, through three intense encounters, an introspective and reserved girl explores the feelings nearly bursting out of her, being confronted with uncertainty and loss of control in the face of desire.
I
So,
love that.
yeah, it was.
I think that's great. What a cool summary for a story that's about a creepy voyeur pushes her fetishistic interests on a very hot friend. No, I
Yes.
love that. That's great. You
I just.
romanticize. I love them, and you summarize them very acutely and very well, which I think is beautiful. We
Yeah.
don't get that. Like we don't have like the IMDb of Wedgie Fish stories where we have a very quick summary or synopsis. And when we often, as writers or even readers, look, and if we do happen to see a writer says, "Oh, my story is about this or X," we never get that kind of poetry of language. It feels like generally in the descriptions, it's like, "Oh, yeah, it's about two girls who are gonna give each other wedgies or whatever," and you're like, "Oh, well, that's helpful and good to know." Uh, but yeah, you don't get that sort of like creative like beauty in some of the summaries, which I think is certainly helpful when we're trying to analyze them from deeper perspectives usually.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I actually think of that kind of thing as like, well, yeah, I kind of. I'm hoping it has that. I kind of figured it did. So what else is
Yeah.
there? What sets this one apart?
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, I mean, I like being able to do that. Kind of like give people a hook if they don't if they haven't read the story already. Um,
Mhm.
because that's a secret fact you didn't know about me. I actually work for Wikipedia, making those. That's my job is to make those tiny little blurbs summarizing the thing at the beginning.
Nice. Perfect. What a job. And then you can put whatever you want there. Be like Shawshank Redemption. It's about like a trip to Mexico. Actually,
Yeah,
it kind of is technically.
yeah,
Yeah, never mind.
technically.
Yep, no. I'll leave the job to you. You know what you're doing.
Okay. All right. So this was first posted on November 12th, 2012, with just over 10,000 views.
Mm,
And so I think we have discussed where we were at the time this was posted.
sure.
But this is one of my all-time favorites because of how insanely well it's written, and I think it's better than Blood Money.
Yeah,
Um,
I like that. Should I ask you why now, or do you want to like unspool that slowly as we go?
I feel like it'll become clear why um, as we go.
Okay.
So just going right into the story, the first chapter has no wedgies. It consists only
Mm-hmm.
of Sasha peeping on her love interest, and yet I don't care because the imagery is perfect, and I'm so
Yeah.
engaged with what's happening. I just want to keep reading.
Yeah.
It's that build up, and it's. I think this was the story that really um, showed me how important a really well done build up to a wedgie and just that introduction to the story, how important that is.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think that's a really cool insight. Because I mean, yeah, if you're a reader of Wedgie Fish stories, the expectation you're going into it is, as like an audience member in the genre, is that there's going to be wedgies, and that's what you're going to get. And you're going to get relatively quickly, and they're going to be relatively good. In this story, nicely done, flips that on its head and says, "You don't get any wedgies. You don't get anything like it." And the title doesn't have wedgies in it. There's no hint that there could be any wedgies or that this story could be like it feels like you read this, you're like, why am I not in like the voyeur fetish boards reading this? Like that's where it could be, like the attention to detail and
Mm-hmm.
how acutely we're seeing Just all the action through the main character's eyes and everything that's going on. You're like, where are the wedgies? I really want them in this scene. But it does hook you and it does tell you a lot about our characters right off the bat and how they see each other. And it sets up like a lot of the themes that we'll see in his next story, Blood Money.
Hmm.
But I feel like kind of prototype a lot of it. This whole idea of the religious symbology, which he goes
Yeah.
very heavy on in this story, but even just this idea of sight and voyeurism as a theme and motif and what's seen and unseen is very clever, and he sets that up really well right from the get-go. It's not a case of like it's very vague, some of the things he wants to tackle. It's very clear that there's ideas he wants to explore, and he lays that out really well.
Yeah, it could be that like a lot of people do have very clear ideas they want to tell, but they end up
Mm.
botching it by being so direct about those ideas. But nicely done, especially in this story. He's able to convey those ideas in a way that is very clear and makes it helps the reader make sense of them, but in a way that is so engaging and all is in a way in a sense is sort of like you're discovering it for yourself, like nicely
Yeah,
done laid the breadcrumbs for you to.
yeah, I love that. I think that's a great metaphor, a great simile, because we don't even get the characters' names. We get Peeper and we get Goddess and we get Angel and it's not till like second chapter a bit way through that we get more crumbs and we
Hmm.
sort of find our way through it and we go, oh, their names are Sasha, name's Chastity, and we sort of the story really does unfold in that way. And there's like Quentin Tarantino said, like best stories are the ones that unfold, that aren't just situations, aren't just things that happen,
Yep.
but it really does have to sort of come in pieces and parts, and you certainly feel that with this one.
Yeah,
And in
absolutely.
that beginning, you're right.
Yeah, and the I actually didn't think about the title, but even just the title itself is something that sort of set the standard for what I should try to do for stories. Because it's such a grabbing title. Um,
Mm.
and like you said, Wedgie does not show up in the title. And
Yeah.
it I think it's more than anything else the story with the title and the story itself. They showed me that to just go after what you want to write, and it doesn't matter uh, who your audience is, as long as you are writing what you want to write and you're writing at the level that you want to, then nothing else matters.
Yeah, it's a familiar, almost cliched sentiment for some of us writers talking about writing in the community now, but I like the title for a lot of reasons, and some of them you hit on. I like the idea that it hints at masochism really
Yeah,
well. This idea that, like, yeah, if you feel fire until it burns, it's gonna hurt you, but presumably until it burns is like that's the moment you take it away. So you're getting pain. Maybe there's a sadism there. Someone's making you feel it until it burns, but kind of quickly on we realize that it is Sasha who has the power here, and so is she trying to like burn the goddess? It's very interesting. And then when we even think about fire and burning, we're thinking about, obviously in the context of angels and sinners, we're thinking about hell, being brought to hell, bringing someone to
yeah,
hell. Maybe hell is the fetish, but even more simply, hell is obviously the sort of pain and discomfort they're going to go through with the wedgies. So that's a really clever like use of the title, especially when they're setting up a lot of things in some more indirect ways, like this whole idea of the tree. If we think of the story through this religious lens, the most obvious tree in probably the history of literature is the tree of knowledge, and the apple and Adam and Eve, and that tree. And when you take from the tree, you get banished because it's bad and it's not good. And that's sort of what we get here. We get a character who's with a tree, gaining knowledge that she shouldn't be getting, and kind of gets punished from falling from the tree. Ends up getting what she wants, though. She ends up getting the knowledge. So I feel like there's an interpretation there that's like this Genesis reading of the Bible. Obviously, the first chapters, angels and sinners, very biblical, and that's something we've seen in Blood Money. Sort of preoccupies Nicely Done. It seems like in
Yeah.
some ways, but even later on, we see this idea of like nature lace petals, which is
Mm-hmm.
very clever, and I loved, always loved that metaphor of like the underwear breaking, and it is like petals falling, and so like beautiful nature being brought into these kind of like very human, very that what could be sweaty and sexual acts that are kind of dirty. Like, there is an elevation of a lot of the action that happens on a few different levels that I think is really great.
Yeah. Wow. That was a fantastic analysis of the first chapters. I had never thought of a comparison between the story and the Bible. That was really good. I like that a lot. And so the first wedgie has so much description that, and
Mm.
nicely done, takes that off readers' hands and lets them focus fully on reading into the scene to pull out the indirect detail. I don't think
Mm.
the amount of the amount of description detail is a bad thing here. I think it's just like the right amount to focus on everything, and then it's not overwhelming. Um, One thing that I absolutely love is Nicely Done's description of chastity as the hunted angel. Yeah, it's
Mm.
such a simple phrase, but it conveys
Yeah.
exactly Sasha's feelings, her sexual
Yeah.
feelings, the status she gives to chastity mentally, even some of her self-image is reflected in that phrase.
It's wild because it's hard for me to know how much like does Chastity like what's going on? Is she into it? And yeah, this idea that like Sasha wants to bring her to hell, it feels like really resonates through really powerfully. And there's a lot of different ways they do this effectively. You can look at the very detailed descriptions and very powerful psychological realism that we get in terms of what the characters are feeling or thinking at any moment and how real that feels, and or how creative the descriptions are, like we even things like her crotch pedals, like kind of
Yeah,
in some ways odd descriptions, but also
unique.
like we mentioned, nature, and kind of there's some beauty to it in some of what we could just call crotch. It's elevating it, as we said. And then there's also the dialogue that I really like in this
Mm-hmm.
story, and how simple it is, how real it is. It doesn't feel overdone. You don't get like a Hans Gutherson monologue where someone's going on, trying to communicate all the themes of the story or something. You just get some of that sadomasochism in it. You get some of that like repressed pleasure and trying to hide what you're feeling. Um, and some of the more cartoony stuff about needing ice and things. And I mean, it's kind of crazy how we keep hearing Chastity described over and over again as the angel. Like it's not something that gets dropped after we learn her name.
No.
It keeps coming up. So we have to think like if this is a lot of this is for like from Sasha's perspective and point of view, she really does see her as the sort of other being who is above everyone else in an almost potentially unhealthy way. She does, it seems, want to hunt her and maybe bring her down to this level
Mm-hmm.
that may be interpreted as hell, or maybe just reality in some ways, because it does feel like the story is a step above reality in some interesting ways.
Yeah. Interesting. And it's also very interesting to me that Chastity wishes she could be lost in the moment, almost like she
Mm,
wishes she could actually enjoy the wedgie.
yeah.
That was a very interesting thing that piqued that brought me in a little closer, that you brought up. It There was one thing. It's with blood. Looking at Blood Money and Feeling the Fire Until It Burns. It is very interesting, how the people who are the I guess the catalyst for all of these sexual encounters happening, they're portrayed as this sort of corrupting force.
Mm,
It's,
nice.
in
Very nice.
feeling the fire until it burns, it's very clearly um, Sasha is at fault for all of this happening. Um, and it's sort of an interesting look at I guess a take on something that rings true for a lot of us that we might have done. Um, Maybe it didn't turn out as good as it did in Feeling the Fire Until It Burns, but ha- setting up these situations, being so manipulative, just trying to just get some wedgies or see a wedgie happen. Um, I think that's that as you've uh, discussed with me in the past. I think it's something that a lot of people have experienced and potentially are. Um, I think even just that little that bit of the story, even that little bit speaks to reality very well.
Sure. Certainly. Yeah, and I like the first point you made, the very I think apt and interesting trend or motif of this idea that those who bring the wedgies in are a corrupting force. I think it speaks to this very broad and fascinating idea of how writers view the fetish as a character in stories or as a force and what it represents, what it looks like, what shape it takes. And here and in Blood Money, interestingly, we see that same version of the fetish as a corrupting force. I think there's almost no better term for it than what you named, because obviously in this story, Sasha is, as I keep reiterating, bringing this angel down to her level. She is hurting her. She is doing bad things to an angel who is obviously this angelic being who's perfect, who's great, who should probably not be having to deal with these sort of things. But
Yeah.
so then where is the appeal in that? In the dynamic, is that a power? Is that a pleasure?
Mm-hmm.
In not just giving a wedgie, but giving a wedgie to someone seemingly unattainable, seemingly better and more powerful and more beautiful, etc., etc. And obviously, in Blood Money, we see very similarly with Elizabeth, a sort of sociopathic relative who is this corrupting force on her more innocent, naive sister, who brings her to this other level of pleasure. So it feels like in Nicely Done's work, we can probably see this idea played out in different forms of what the fetish looks like and what it means, and certainly an interesting topic. And I'm glad you brought it up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Something that you said earlier with the describing them as a devil and an angel. That is such a fantastic dichotomy between Sasha and Chastity. It's another perfect way of describing the two without directly telling readers what he means.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. From it's you're right because certainly on one level it's a very obvious binary, and we
right.
know someone on a separate note who loves his binaries, so they
Yeah.
are not uncommon in wedgie fish fiction, and obviously there's the very clear ones we've come up against and chatted about: bully, nerd, dom, sub. Like they do play a pretty key role in the stories within the community and the genre. Although I suppose more broadly, binaries are probably pretty key in most things everywhere. But certainly within the community, we can see a lot of them throughout. It isn't hard to find them. And so here, that's an obvious one we can point out, and he doesn't really hide that. He starts the story with chapter one, watching angels and sinners, and keeps
Mm-hmm.
describing her as an angel. You're right that like there is a subtlety into it. Like we don't have Sasha really called a devil or any of those demon, any of that stuff. We don't really get that, which is good. Like we get little stuff of like trying a devilish trick to train her eyes, back to the godly figure is a line in the story, and so we
Mm-hmm.
get hints, but you're right, it's not too explicit, which is good. And then from that, it tells us about the characters very simply. It tells us if one's an angel, what traits do they have? If one is not an angel, if one is kind of the opposite of that. And what does that mean? And at the same point where it probably adds something to see the angel brought down, it, on the other hand, probably also adds something to the character of Sasha, as she's coming from a place where she's willing to do all these things to an angel. Like, not just anybody. She's willing to peep on this perfect being. She's willing to wedgie her and bring her to all these, introduce her to, again, this new place of pleasure, which is very interesting. It does tell us, it feels like, a lot about these characters in a pretty short span,
Mm-hmm.
without obviously writing in some line like, and Sasha was a devil who wanted to bring this angel down and make her feel good. It's like, because that's certainly not as interesting as the way the story does unfold over time, it feels like.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a it's very interesting look at the story when you think about the fact that Sasha isn't described as a devil
Hmm.
explicitly until
Yeah.
um, the opportunity is there for her to corrupt Chastity.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's in chapter 3, and this story, for those who don't know, is very short. It's only like 4 or 5 parts, not very long. I imagine if we were to check the word count, wouldn't be very long at all. And we do see her, I think, explicitly, Sasha, that is, called a devil, in an episode or a chapter called "Fallen Angels" in Steampunk. So we do sort of get a bit more hit on the head there, where it's like Sasha is the devil in this metaphor, and obviously, as has already been made clear, Chastity, whose name in some ways couldn't be more angelic when you think about it.
Yeah.
And even just her name in general, Chastity, like not
Mm-hmm.
having sex, like she's doing all this sexual stuff, and that's because of Sasha. So it's
Yeah.
just really fascinating. Like she's clearly corrupting her, so to speak, and like doesn't shy away from that. But there's a layer of subtlety. Like it doesn't take much to peel it back and be like, we see what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But done in an indirect and very creative way, which I like.
Yeah, one's consistent throughout NicelyDone's
Mm,
work too, which is it's
yes.
interesting. Um, yeah,
Yeah, it feels like it is that almost. This might sound like not as complimentary as I like, but a sort of surface level like cleverness. And what I mean by that is just like stuff you can look at and you might miss because you're not thinking about it, like the
right.
angels in the title, the devil stuff, the tree. But it's kind of obvious. Same as in Blood Money when their last name is Gray, and I dug into how you get this whole idea of morality being white black, and then if you're in the middle it's gray. Like it's not hard to look at these things and dig into it, but I suppose the interesting thing is 2012, this is way before I start doing podcasts, way before we get anybody talking in much detail about stories in the community and analyzing stuff. So we get, in the limited forms we have, like comments where people are like, "Oh, I like this," or even a young Hans Gutherson in the comments of the story being like, "I like the angel and devil stuff you're doing." Pretty much is
Mm-hmm.
what I said. Um, and you get other comments like that. We don't have anyone analyzing, so it's interesting to me to think that Nicely Done would put in a lot of these efforts and hints and clues at a time when people weren't looking for them. By all
Mm-hmm.
accounts, people weren't, from at least from a writer's perspective, you don't have any reason to think like if you're writing really clever stuff, people are going to be picking it apart and appreciating you for these efforts. So it's really interesting to me that he would do all of this and do it really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost like he was anticipating us doing these things, but it's
Hey,
impossible.
maybe. Yeah, maybe if he hadn't done it, we wouldn't be here talking about it.
Maybe. I don't know if I'd be writing if he hadn't done it. So
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. Even the chapter titles are amazing at capturing the
Mm,
essence of each chapter. I, nicely done his chapter titles. Even there, he's still showing how fantastic of a writer he is. Chapter 1, Watching Angels and Sinners. It's a bit on the nose, but it really sets
Yeah.
the scene and the tone for the story as a whole.
Yeah.
Chapter
Yeah, it's
2,
true.
Chapter 2, Lace Petals, works so well as foreshadowing to Chastity's underwear and the pure bliss Sasha will experience from giving a wedgie. Even Chastity's delicate and dainty reaction after the wedgie. And then Chapter 3, Fallen Angels and Steampunk, describes exactly the change both characters go through, with Chastity falling from grace into a more perverted place, and Sasha
Mm.
unintentionally exploring a new side of herself.
Love that. Yeah, it's so true. And I mean, even just like the first chapter title, Watching Angels and Sinners, like we're very clearly, when you're reading this, you're watching the angel. And we have to step back and think, oh, yeah, but we're also watching Sasha watch Chastity. And is
Mm-hmm.
this like this double layer to we become the voyeur and we are peeping on both the characters and seeing both of them, and we're put in this like unique position where it's like we are also being the peeper, we are becoming the person in the tree, and what does that mean? So it's a very interesting idea even from the very beginning. And as you pointed out, lace petals has a lot of different meanings. Some of them he explicitly points out in the story. Same with Fallen Angels and Steampunk. They do some cosplaying, and I still remember that very clearly.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but there's also this very deep idea of, as you, I love how you put it, like bringing it to a perverted place, and it feels like almost like this purgatory. And that's something I remember, and we might be able to chat about. Like when I read this the first time, and as I've gone back through it over the years, it feels very dreamlike. It feels very like the world is kind of vague. So I always wondered, with all this like religious symbology, if the story is like they're in purgatory or something, or like there's
Hmm.
something there, they're trapped in some place, and they are like, maybe she, I don't know if we go as far as say she's an actual angel or something bizarre like that, but maybe the metaphor is just they're in purgatory and they have to like get each other out of it, and they have to maybe balance out the angelic and the devilish like versions of themselves or something like that. I wasn't so sure. This whole idea of dreaming, which is pretty big in the story too, and like I wonder. I feel like what it was years back when I hear her fall out of the tree. I wonder if she had died, and the rest of the story is her being dead and in purgatory, or like or something like that. But maybe I'm just crazy. I don't know if you think there's anything to that.
That's super interesting. It is uh, perhaps even more interesting how many stories you seem to think everybody's dead in.
There's two. There's Fred Sessions where I can confirm it, and then there's this
You
one.
can
That's
quote
it.
unquote confirm it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's that is I some something else I have not thought about before. I don't know how much stock I can put into it, but it kind of reminds me of that one story. I can't remember the title of it, where they go to the wedgie dimension. Um, and
Mm,
it's this female who's on a fetish website. She's chatting with a woman, and they show each other's faces, and it's this beautiful blonde woman, I think.
yeah.
And she transports her to the wedgie dimension, and then they meet she meets a guy by in hanging in a hanging wedgie, um,
Yeah.
and then they start to try to escape, and that's the story. Do you
Yeah.
recognize that one?
I don't. I want to
Oh,
know what
okay.
that is in
It's
case
really
I've
not
read
well.
it
It's
off the
not well
top of my
written at
head.
all.
Oh, I love the concept though. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, but it's kind of reminded me of the way you describe it. Kind of the way you describe that idea kind of reminds me of that one, but done in a much better way. Like that story's not really well written at all.
Yeah.
Um, no, I think there can be. I can understand and see where you got that from. I could definitely get behind it to some degree, but I think that's one of those theories that it kind of suffers because of the lack of um, source material to work with, so you're kind of filling in
Yeah.
a lot of the gaps yourself. Um, but I feel like you could make some kind of uh, I feel like you could make some kind of argument for it, that could potentially stand up, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's
As
it,
always, I love this idea that we can do this. Like it becomes a different story for me or for you, and it's those stories that can do that that I feel like generally stand out more for us and are the ones we can look at and say like this is a good story. Like if you read it and no one has a different idea of the story in their mind, whether it's the first time reading it or after a couple times or whatever, if they've read it tons of times and they still have this idea in their head, I think that's a good sign that the story is special compared to like, oh yeah, everything's very clear and there's nothing I can put into it to make it my own. And I mentioned Quentin Tarantino because I just saw like a clip of an interview where he's mentioning stuff like the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. That's iconic. Or I hadn't caught this, but in Inglorious Bastards, Brad Pitt's character has like a rope burn around his neck and stuff like that. He never explains where they come from. And whether you're a fan or not of Quentin Tarantino and his work and his apparent foot fetish, which we like to harp about because he's one of these well-known people who have a fetish, apparently, although he says no. It's this idea that, like, yeah, if you leave these things open, they can become parts of stories in our own minds, and we can take that. And then he said, like, if he explains what these things are, you're gonna throw away the ideas you had and the stories you had and the sort of version of the entire like what feeling the fire until it burns that you had in your head. If Nicely Done
mm-hmm.
comes on and says, "Oh no, it's not dead," whatever, and it's oh, there goes that interpretation. Like I just sound dumb if I say it now, but thankfully, like we are able to wonder about this. And there's I feel like as I said, there's something special about the stories that allow you to do that, where there's room for it, compared to the ones where everything is very clear and straightforward, and it's like there's nothing to interpret. Or anything like that, where you're just like, yeah, it was a fun story, and I'll read it again, but like, I don't feel like it's something I could try and talk about as an example of like, wow, look at what writers were doing and look at this, like the importance of this and why this story is cool. Like you can't really point to any of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really well said. I personally don't know too much about Tarantino myself, but it would take out the mystery of it, if you were to explain everything. And
It's true. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
becomes a very stiff story at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, it really opens stuff up in kind of crazy ways. Like I don't want to harp on him too much because he's not a wedgie fish writer or like anything like that. But
As far as we
like
know.
the I've heard crazy, and people have probably, if you know Pulp Fiction, you may have heard of how crazy the theories are of what's in this iconic briefcase and
Yeah.
everything from does it connect to his earlier films or is it a character's soul? And I've heard that a lot. And like it becomes a very different movie if like that's how you think about it. I never thought about that till I watched this interview where I'm like, yeah, it becomes this kind of like religious thing. And like that's what we're able to do with Feeling the Fire, where it's like because of the choices about angels and demons, because she falls out of a tree and we don't explicitly know if she's dead, although like you could assume she's not pretty safely. But like you fall off a tree, maybe you also die. Is all I'm thinking. Like you can look at it that way too, and that may not have been intentional. It's just like, oh, it'd be funny to have her fall out of a tree. It's like that could kill you, depending how high she is up in a tree,
Yeah.
high enough to like peek in on this person and not be clearly spotted. Like she's not right outside her window, presumably. Um, and it feels like from the very beginning a kind of difficult climb, and it's not a very easy tree to climb. Like it goes on a bit about that. So I wonder, like, because of the way the world looks and these other hints, like maybe there's something to her being dead, and she's trying to like she's in purgatory, but she's also getting all this good stuff. So maybe she's in heaven, and maybe like she's in
Climbing up to
heaven
heaven.
with chastity and the interesting thing is she falls into heaven, and instead of falling to hell, which is how we often think about it. So this kind of
Yeah.
inversion, but like she gets all this beautiful stuff right after she falls from the tree. She's no longer just viewing the action. She gets to be an active part and participant in it, in these very dreamlike scenarios, very where like the angel is into all of it. She gets her own angel. Like where else could you get that except for in heaven?
Hmm.
I wonder. So
I
I don't know.
hmm.
I'm
That
into it.
actually that makes me think of like the sirens from Greek mythology, um,
Yeah.
where it's you get this dreamlike heavenly experience, but then in reality you're actually basically in hell.
Yeah, could be a cool turn in the story. Like we realize as the story plays out, as the angel devil symbology keeps going on and different things happening, she must be in heaven, is what we think, and it's like, nope, surprise, she was in hell the whole time, and you're punished to, I don't know, maybe repeat everything or like a 11 dreaming of what was it 11/22. I'll
Dreaming of
say
12, 13,
93.
13.
12. I was 100% wrong on all those numbers. 12, 13, 13. A bunch of
Yeah.
unlucky numbers. Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's like that. Maybe it's something totally different where she's just like she loses this world that she had. Maybe that's the punishment
Hmm.
for her. Oh,
Hmm.
very interesting.
If only we could have seen what would have happened.
Yes, exactly. After this, he goes on to write Blood Money and a few other stories that, other than Blood Money, don't get finished, I believe. Like three,
Yeah.
Hello, I Don't Like Soccer, and Hey, Don't Pull on That. That's one very long title for those who don't know. And The Birthday Present. I think that's all of Nicely Done stories. Like, and we've already talking about these two, chatted about like whatever that is, 15% of their entire catalog, which is kind of
Yeah.
bonkers.
Yeah.
And the fact it stands out because I feel like, and I sent you the link to it, like to the story called The Fetish Demons
Okay.
hyphen 18 plus. That might have been the one you were mentioning with this idea of a wedgie dimension. It sounds like it was, but it could be wrong. And I mean, it has more views, I think, than Feeling the Fire Until It Burns. But from a glance, certainly not as well written. Um, as a Feeling the Fire, but that's as we know, and it's no surprise really. Like generally, we see constantly this whole thing of, and it annoys us writers obviously, but like these poorly written stories or stories we don't think are as good, getting so many views and all the love, and we're like, but we wrote this, it was so long, and it doesn't matter. People are gonna like what they're gonna like.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That is the story I was talking about. The Wedgie Demons. Um, that's it. Kind of feels like that's what it reminded me of the way you described the idea. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah. In any other story, the pretty random switches between Sasha's and Chastity's points of view would be kind of jarring.
Mm.
But because the three chapters focus on such intense moments between the two, it makes so much sense in my mind that the POVs would be blurring together when each chapter progressively has the two go a little further in exploring each other, almost like they're losing themselves and coalescing into one being.
I like them. See, feel like that confirms my theory that they're like one being or something, purgatory suffering. Yeah, no, I mean it moves along really quickly, the story. And I mean, while we get a lot of like the psychological realism of what they're thinking and feeling, it is so focused on these couple short moments. We don't get like backstories. We don't get stuff that happened before, which makes it kind of dreamlike. And you know that Inception quote of like, you can't remember the beginning of dreams, you never remember how they start, kind of thing. It's like, feels like that's the case here. Like, but we don't know before the tree, and we don't know a lot of other stuff, and we get like that one anecdote about the wedgie from the past before all this action. But other than that, it's like just moving from different scene to different scene, and they're kind of like loosely connected where they're just sort of still together. and you're like, is this real? Like, what's the broader like context in this relationship that we don't know about? And you don't really need it though, and the story works without it, and it adds a lot that we don't have it, including this dreamlike like atmosphere and this interesting tone into the story. And so certainly when the point of views shift, you're kind of like expecting it and you're kind of like ready for it because of how the story sets it up. It feels like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it feels very natural, and yeah, like it fits right in place with with how the story goes.
Yeah.
Now, and with the dialogue, it's this is one of the only stories where I'm actually glad there isn't much in the way of dialogue.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like it would slow the pace down.
Mm.
Normally the opposite. It's normally the opposite, and detail and description slow the pace down. Yet, because Nicely Done focuses on the actions of each character and their thought processes, it almost feels unnecessary to have more dialogue. And I think
Yeah.
the lack of it actually contributes to showing a friendship or budding sexual relationship that stands out from so many other character pairings.
Yeah. Yeah, the very minimalist dialogue I think is an interesting choice. And I think it works well. Like it keeps things moving. We do get these longer paragraphs of great description and setting up what the characters are looking like in a specific moment, and that's basically the most description we get is what do the characters look like, what positions are they in, both physically, literally, and like metaphorically, in terms of who's the goddess, who's the devil at any given moment, because this does shift. Even within the short 3 chapters that we have, we see them trying different roles, which is interesting. But we don't see that like through dialogue. The dialogue just kind of adds a little, I think, as one character says, zest, which is a very odd word to hear in a story, which is so like fun and deep and poetic. But it does kind of pepper in a little bit of that, like points you can look at and you go, oh yeah, I really like how real it feels, and it is this little bit of realism, and like it's very like playful and very like sexualized, but it's also fun, and certainly like because it's so tight, you can really just keep moving along in the story and move from like detailed description of what they look like and what they're doing, to the next one and the next one, so on, without dialogue breaking it up or characters trying to tell us something that we're clearly being shown, very often. So yeah, I thought dialogue being minimalist is a really good choice for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it adds to the strength of the story. And so, with that, what do you think the other strengths of this story are?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think everything we've talked about, from this like layer, as thin or as however you want to view it, of these potentially deeper themes and motifs about angels and devils, I think that's definitely a strength to it. The fact it's not like a character of Sasha or somebody. Unlike when we look at like sadistic, where a character writes out everything and writes it out in great detail and then like examines everything, we have to sort of read into it a bit, and I like that. And it's not hard to do it, as we said. A lot of examples, even like here she was, her best friend, but she didn't seem like a friend in this holy sight. Like language like that, where you're like, holy sight, like clearly you're seeing it. This idea of bronze shoulders, like super angelic. You're like, where are her wings? Is what you're wondering. Partway through, you're like, why are they not flying to heaven? Like, but I feel like it's really powerful and adds a lot to the story, and is that reason I come back to it and think about it and want to talk about it, because there are these layers that you can interpret in different ways that really set it apart, um, which I think is great, and it makes sense to do it, and it's not like you have to try super hard for something that probably isn't there or might not be, but I think that's great. And I love the two characters. I think they have a really cool dynamic, and I especially love how it does feel like it's shifting. It isn't the entire story with Sasha giving to Chastity, and Chastity is this one note receiver who's just perfect and getting brought down. Like, it feels like she is shifting, although the story is very short and we don't see a lot of it beyond a couple scenes. It does feel like by the end of chapter 3 she is becoming this different person, and I like how you point out she's getting corrupted, maybe being brought to this perverted place. I think that's all really wonderful. Those are like the three standouts, I think, for me.
Hmm. Well, my answer is everything, but I mean,
Nice. Good. Yeah.
um, uh, each scene is delivered perfectly. Yeah, they balance exactly what needs to be conveyed with allowing readers to pull so much indirect detail out of the material. If I had to pinpoint one, that would be it. That's the
Nice.
for the
That's
length
great.
for the length of it. What we have is so much to work with. That's below the
It's
surface.
true.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's true. Absolutely.
And so, conversely, what do you think the weaknesses are, if any?
I'll try to. I can't. I was gonna try to avoid saying that wasn't continued, but I can't. I want it to be continued. Um, I don't know. I mean, like, I guess there's a version of the story that's more subtle in some of its choices, but then again, subtle to me might be very different to someone else who maybe hasn't read as much or seen as many movies. So, like, when we see the ice at the end of chapter 2, I'm like, oh, here we go, ice, and that's cold, and hell also has a layer of level that's cold in biblical terms. So are they in the seventh level of hell, or is it just like they're so? It's this whole idea of feeling the fire until it burns. They're in hell, but they're cooling each other off and they're saving each other for. So like all this stuff I'm reading and I'm going super deep into it. Like I wonder if you could go more subtly as a writer, or if that even works. Like, if you try to go subtly, if we have a story and it's like one of those ones I'm vaguely critiquing, where it's like everything is laid out and there's no layers you can look at and things like that. I mean, I guess what I would have liked to see maybe is some more growth maybe in Sasha. Like she sort of becomes a receiver, but is she starting to feel anything different? Like, is she still viewing Chastity as this angel, or is the relationship starting to normalize where they're like both seeing each other as human beings? And I like this idea that like you can start a relationship seeing somebody in such a beautiful, like perfect light, but eventually like their flaws are going to be revealed and you're going to realize they're not as perfect. So as they spend time together, it would have maybe been cool if we see that whole angel facade kind of cracking. But we don't really have anything that has that happen. Like Chastity starts as an angel and kind of becomes more angelic in how she gives really hot wedgies and stuff later on. So she seems kind of flawless, and I suppose in some ways they both kind of do, just in different ways. One is like perfect angel, another one's like a perfect devil.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it all just I think it boils down to the length. Um,
Yeah,
if we'd gotten more, then um, we might have seen that.
sure.
Um, and like that's the only weakness I can see. It's really just it's too short. We need
Yeah,
more.
it's too short. It's too short. We need more, definitely.
That's
Certainly.
yeah. Luckily Unlucky and Sore Winner were the two stories that really planted the seeds for me understanding that wedgie stories could be so insanely better than what we were
Mm.
getting now, but at the time. Um, Feeling the fire until it burns is the one that gave life to those seeds and had them bloom into beautiful flowers. Um, yeah, rereading it, it always reminds me of just how much this story has inspired me, from fully helping me realize my love for indirect detail to showing me how worthwhile and necessary it is to have really good build up.
Mm.
This story holds a very special place. So
Awesome. I
uh,
love that we can talk about it. That's
yeah,
great.
absolutely. And so since we've brought up that the length is really the thing that needs to be changed, how would you continue the story?
Wow. Yeah, I mean that's so hard because I already threw a ton of potential thoughts of where the story's going in my head. I mean, I don't know if I end it with them. It realizes they're trapped in purgatory. Maybe I do. Maybe they're in some sort of plane. Maybe heaven. Maybe hell. But they have to move from it to some better place. Very
Yeah.
romantic like that. And I wouldn't want them to end up somewhere really sad and depressing. I don't think. Although I like the idea that like they think they're in heaven and then surprise, you're actually in hell. I do like that Twilight Zone kind of twist. That actually is kind of fun to me.
Yeah.
But so I would probably take it to like this biblical kind of place. But then I mean that kind of ruins the magic of what Nicely Done was doing, where it's not clear if they are or not. So I guess I'd have to leave it vague. I don't know. Maybe I do a lost ending where they walk into some white light together. Although that even still might be too obvious. But I want them to sort of grow as two people and see them becoming maybe less angelic and demonic and more just normal. And then maybe we do just end on a moment where they're leaving the house, because I don't think we ever see them leave the house in the story, and that might be very symbolic in some ways. Because in my mind, it would signify them leaving whatever plane they were on, whether it's purgatory, heaven, hell, or even just the place in their relationship. If you want to like disregard the biblical reading and have your own interpretation, if you have them actually leaving the house together, because after Sasha's brought into it, we just see them together, and it's like it'd be interesting to see them moving to the next step, whatever that is. And the next step being them just going out into the world together, perhaps better and change people, something like that. And then if you read it, and if you're me, you can say, oh, it's actually them leaving whatever plane they're on. But then also you can look at it just straightforward, like they're moving on to new things, kind of thing, and they're moving on together. And so you kind of get maybe that subtlety still, the indirectness that the story does, I feel like, does do very well without like being too obvious. But you keep the layers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's, I like that. And it is interesting. That's the house is something I want to talk about a little bit later. Um,
Yeah.
it's yeah, that's an interesting thing. I think I try to do it like Nicely Done and keep swapping the roles Sasha and
Mm.
Chastity fall into, because it becomes increasingly clear during the second chapter that both of them seem to get some kind of excitement from being dominated.
Yeah.
I don't know how you. I don't have a firm like any actual sort of details. I don't know how it would actually be continued, but I feel like it would something like that would happen. Um,
You know what's funny too that I just learned because I looked this up. I should have looked it up earlier because I'm fascinated by the meaning of names. Sasha, interestingly, means defender, helper of mankind.
really?
So it's
Wow.
very funny to see her as like a devil, as someone who is like not helping. She's helping herself. So like I wonder. Obviously, chastity has to be a very deliberately chosen name. It's going to be rare, and it obviously has these sort of like religious connotations around being chaste and not having sex, and obviously she breaks this because of Sasha's influence. So like there's an irony on one level with Sasha and her name, and he plays into this with her not really helping mankind. But as she switches roles, maybe we see her evolve. As you point out, like I love your idea that they keep changing roles. They keep it's there. Who's the not just like who's the giver receiver, but who's the angel devil. And does Sasha end up like becoming a better person, like moving from someone who creeps to like would she ever tell Chastity that's what she was doing, or does Chastity know And this was Chastity into it. Like, do we find that out later? She's like, yeah, I knew you were creeping on me. You're in my tree. Of course I saw you there. Like,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And do they have like a little fight or something, or does in like a heavenly way does she realize like, no, I was into it. You watch me. Why do you think I was posing in front of the window? Like, something like that. So very interesting stuff with the characters. Certainly would have loved to see more of them to see how it plays out.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything uh, to support thinking of the Sasha from Friend Sessions as like an alternate reality of Sasha from here?
I love that. I think so. I feel like obviously like he will tell you, AP will tell you like Lucy was like a subconscious choice. I didn't even think about the name. And that's probably partly true, but also like she is like an alternate version of my Lucy. It feels like this nerd who ends up within a like a circle where there's a lot of wedgies and has to kind of deal with that. Um and I feel like that's similar with Sasha. We get this character who's very much into wedgies and plays a very different role, obviously, as like a corrupting force, whereas they all sort of corrupt each other in friend sessions, interestingly, which is a bit different. Because you don't often have these stories where it's like these groups of wedgie fetishists have an actual healthy and not just like orgiastic relationship with each other, although we do see that that is a big focus for them and interest. Um, and fascinatingly too, doesn't create more problems for a group of like hormonal like university students because they're all giving each other wedgies, getting each other off, and there's like it becomes kind of simplistic in how the relationships break down into these very clear binaries. AP loves his binaries, as we know.
Yeah.
Instead of like, oh, but like she got me off the other day, I really like her. Like, no, it's like, no, we got our partners, and it's also fun if we also give each other wedgies. So like, yeah, but wouldn't you like have some mixed feelings about this like crazy six sum or whatever like they're having at some points and how they're all like turning each other on and like, no, it keeps it simple. So Sasha, I think I like this idea that could be certainly a version of her there. I don't. I mean, AP does, he's into psychological realism in some ways, not to the same degree as like I am, or I don't think he really comes from that same school. But I love this idea that she could definitely be seen as that. Definitely,
Yeah.
I like it.
If you could add a character, who would they be?
Oh wow, because three is the magic number, and we only have two characters here. Who would be a good third character in this story?
Yeah, I guess.
That's a really tough question.
Yeah,
Wow,
I guess you have
that's
to.
really tricky.
I guess you have to look at like um, what roles are already being filled by the two characters present in the story already, and then
Yeah.
um, you'd have to look at what if there's enough there for another character.
Yeah. And in some ways it feels like there isn't at first glance. The only thing I can think is you bring in some kind of person who's a switch who's not into wedgies at all. And the thing I'm going for with that is both they can fill either role. Although the interesting thing is we know is Sasha Chastity, they are moving between them, which is kind of unique and kind of interesting, and like the fluidity with which they do that is cool. Um, but I'm thinking like you have a person who's not a fetishist who just comes in to the area, like into the house, is seeing these wedgies and isn't into them, but gets into giving and receiving them from both of them. And the also the secondary purpose to this character would be if Sasha is the devil and Jesse's the angel, we have this other person who's just the human, the normal one, who's not like some being who's separate or biblical, but like is maybe the third version of themselves, you know, in this interpretation where they're maybe one person or they're trying to become better people who are more normal and human. That's what this third person is showing. I mean, it becomes problematic when we think the third person doesn't have a fetish and what I'm saying about the fetish there subconsciously. But separate from that, like just showing someone who doesn't view them as an angel or a devil, who sees the world not through any of the lenses they're bringing to the action, who is okay to give and get wedgies but isn't going to stare at somebody through a window and then try to manipulate their way into it. Like, that might be an interesting perspective that maybe helps the characters learn a bit and grow a bit. Maybe. I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of, though. That's a really crazy question you asked. What do you think? Did you have someone in mind for a third character?
No, because it does feel like when you first start thinking about it, like there's not really any space for another character. But
Yeah,
if it was
it's
going to
true.
be if the story was going to be continued, I think you would need to have another character come in. Um,
Yeah.
I like your idea a lot. I think you could do a lot with it. I guess to give myself some time to think. Do you think that new character would be male or female?
Oh, man. What another hard question. I mean, if you're not into males getting and receiving, then that's an out as like a writer reader. If you're posting on Lucky Fish forums, he's probably a female. I mean, the fun thing about the third character too is they get to be in the middle of like what could be a fun like wedgie war between Sasha and Chastity, where they're maybe joking and trying to turn each other on by giving or getting wedgies from this third person, and they get to watch and wish they were in it. If it's a dude, you get potentially like this really stronger guy who can give really hard wedgies and isn't holding back, whatever. Um, but then if it's a woman, it maybe is very cool. 'Cause she could also be very strong, obviously, but maybe also complicates things. And like, does Sasha start seeing them as an angel, or in her sort of like the way she thinks about things? How is she going to view this third person? Are they an enemy, a friend? Are they somehow elevated also? Um, or are they like the interloper messing up their cool thing with chastity that they got going? And like, are they trying to manipulate them out of there or something? I don't. It opens up a lot of potential, and certainly if the story kept on going for a while, we would need more. I think than these sort of like sitcom esque moments between Sasha and Chastity, where they're going back and forth. Like, now I'm getting the wedgie while we're cosplaying. Now you're getting the wedgie while we're in the kitchen. You know what I mean? It's like you need
Right.
probably some more substance as we go potentially. I
Yeah.
don't know though.
So I guess here's a question that'll help, I think, determine how the form that the imaginary character would take. Do you think it would be better for the story to expand beyond a house, beyond a private location into the outside world, or do you think it's that would ruin the story? You think it's better to keep it contained?
I would eventually have them leave the house, but I wouldn't say what they do there. I would just end it with them walking out the door.
Okay, so the
And
rest
it
of the
would be symbolic because the
yeah,
rest of you're right. Sorry, yeah, to answer your question, the rest of the story, I would keep it in the house, but
okay,
some more stuff would have to happen. I mean, it's the
right,
obvious thing is like if you want to break this whole illusion of like where are they, if they are they trapped in a place, kind of, you can just move their wedgie action to other locations, and you can do that.
right,
I also have a soft spot, and like you just put them anywhere. You could even have them at the cosplay competition, like doing wedgies in a bathroom or whatever, like any of that stuff, like
yeah,
and you put them in any situation and you just keep giving the wedgies. I mean, and you could look at it and say, oh yeah, but maybe it's still like they're still in this plane and it's possible, whatever. But I have a soft spot for stories that are set in one location or set over a very short period of time. Or, and these are the three, like, I think Aristotle called them poetics or something. There's like the three, and he originally believed that stories needed to have these three things. And then we see I don't know why I'm giving people an English lecture. They probably don't care. Shakespeare would do this in some of his poetry and stories, but then he also kind of broke these rules. Interesting. One of the reasons he's so revered. But the other third thing was like it revolves around one singular event. Period.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a soft spot for stories like that are so tight and focused, especially when it's like one location or a very short period of time. I think that's really interesting. And we see obviously bottle episodes of shows where this happens. And I brought it up before, I think, on past episodes talking about how I love this. So I think it'd be really cool. Plus, also keep this idea of like they're trapped in a place. Is she dead? And is this like her heaven, hell, etc.? If she's just in the house, and then when they leave the house, what does that signify? It gives like an added meaning to it if the story is to be written a certain way. It's certainly a very different story if it's like, oh, okay, here's the next place they're at, and it becomes more of this sitcom-y wedgie story, which are more common
Mm-hmm.
than like they're always in one place. Obviously, they can do different creative wedgies within a house, and you can use that to great effect. But I mean, I feel like also having like rereading this, thinking about it now, I feel like I was inspired to write what I was an interactive story I had, which was very short, and it's about a person who is in a house, going through the house, and they give themselves different wedgies. And the surprise of that story, spoiler alert, if I ever get back to it, because I haven't written in it in years, was like it turns out they were dead the whole time or something. Either they were dead, or so maybe that's my fascination with everybody being dead, or I think what it was someone else had died. Yeah. That's what it was. Someone else had died, and but they appear in the house in different moments, and they're remembering this person and stuff. And they're what is really happening is the character you're playing as is moving through the stages of grief. And as they go through the different wedgies, they're going through a different stage of grief. And in the end, they do leave the house and they go out. So thinking about that, like it coming back to me as we're talking about this story, I wonder if like I was inspired by that and this whole idea like leaving the house should be significant and symbolic. If you're gonna set a lot of it in the house, don't have them leave because that's gonna take away from it. It's gonna turn into a sitcom. Like I wonder if that's maybe all connected in my weird brain.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. um, I guess if the story is continuing in private locations, um, it would have to be someone who either knows Chastity or Sasha. Because otherwise,
Yeah.
I don't know how it would make sense for someone to come in. Um, I don't know. I don't really have any firm ideas on a good character to add because it's just that we see two settings and we have it's I guess it's kind of hard to make locations that feel authentic to the story if you're not the one who made the story.
Yeah. It's hard. It's certainly hard. Yeah. I mean, and that's the crazy thing about adaptations, which I didn't really get for a long time. And I'd just be mad when something wasn't like exactly like the book or something. And I'd be like, oh,
Right.
a book's always better. The crazy thing that as I grow older, as I hear more people who I admire, like Mike Flanagan, who did some Stephen King adaptations, great director and writer, like adaptation is such a tricky art because you have to bring something of yourself into it, and you're
Mm-hmm.
going to do that. Sometimes you can do that to great effect. A lot of times, what we see is very poorly done adaptations, and we see like the Death Note
Mm-hmm.
movie, which was terrible and
Full
so
Metal
bad, and
Alchemist
you see like
movies.
the yeah, like in
Oh,
anime we see it a lot because people have such
Bleach.
strong connections to these brands and these IPs that they
Oh.
read and that are in some cases very long running, and you have to try to compact that. And so you obviously have a monumental challenge there. But even just this idea that we were to adapt into our own writing styles, like we're gonna be bringing in different interpretations, and you want that as an adaptation. That's inevitably what's going to happen, and whether that presupposes a loss meaning like something is going to be taken away because it's someone else's vision, or if it adds something new, depending how you look at it. That's a tough question. Probably a bit of both. You're probably, as someone adapts, inevitably it's not going to be the story it was or could have been, but can you add something? Can you still make it fun? The whole cliche of keeping to the spirit of the thing, which we hear a lot about in adaptations. You clearly want that, whatever that thing is. It's hard to point down because my idea of it and feeling the fire is probably different from anybody else who reads it. They're going to come into it with a different idea. And that's the nature of the story. Some stories it might be more easy to just straight up turn it into something or continue it, and like the fetish demons just have them escape this realm with tons of crazy bonkers stupid wedgies, and it doesn't feel like anything too different. But feeling the fire might be a trickier proposition to turn into something else.
Definitely. Who do you think is the better character as a person, Sasha or Chastity?
Oh wow, better person. Wow. I mean, I wonder if it's a trick question. I'm gonna say Chastity, but you let me know if I'm wrong and it's a trick question.
I
Cause
mean,
like she feels like this angel, she acts like it in a lot of ways, and is there to like satisfy Sasha. It feels like in any way, so she's very helpful compared to Sasha, who should be, if her namesake is accurate, a defender, a helper of mankind, but it doesn't feel like she is. I don't know. Am I wrong though? Is
I don't know.
Sasha the better
It's
person, you
it's
think?
it's I don't have the definitive answer, but
Ah,
I don't know. It's like Sasha isn't above creeping on people, even if she's conflicted
yeah,
about it, quote unquote conflicted. Um, and although we don't get as much of Chastity's thought process, I picked up on something dark in her. Like she's fine with manipulating people or using them, and
yeah,
this it shows when she takes advantage of Sasha's vulnerable state on the steampunk cosplay.
yeah.
So I don't think she's
That's a good point.
as good of a person as Sasha yeah, as Sasha puts out.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah,
I think that's great.
it is a tough question.
Yeah,
I kind of want to say Sasha because she's going after what she wants, but it's also she wants someone else, so it doesn't exactly work out all the time like that.
yeah,
I don't know. It's the way we see Chastity later at the end of the story, and she's just completely controlling Sasha, basically. It
yeah,
kind of makes me lean into Sasha being the better person. Um, it feels like Sasha was going after some treasure that she thought she understood, and then it turns into like this um, what's the phrase? I guess like she's pulled into a trap that
I like that.
and like Chastity is lurking. Who she really is on the inside is lurking, and then once she's baited uh, Sasha, then
Yeah,
she goes in for the kill. Chastity is like an
I love that.
anglerfish.
Hey, I love it. I love this. I love this idea, like, especially if she knew she was peeping. So she's like, I have my next victim. Like,
Yep.
she falls out of the tree, but maybe if she's done that before, she's done some, like, light Yagami thing where she, like, coated the tree and made it hard to climb so she would fall out of it. Because she even says something about how hard it is to climb this tree and, like, it's coated something or something. So she makes her fall a tree, brings her inside the house, and then has her as like a plaything. So she like does everything from like the first teasing. We look at it like Chastity knows what she wants and she's playing into it. So she's slowly saying like Wedgie exactly what she wants, and then gets to give it to her later. So maybe she is like this secret psycho who's
Mm-hmm.
super into him, super manipulative. Yeah, that's interesting. I love this. This is great. This is
Yeah,
great.
that's a thought I put together as I was saying it.
That's
She's
amazing. I
Cha-
love that thought.
Chastity is the anglerfish, and her lord
Yes,
is uh, the facade that she's put out for
I love it.
Sasha
That's
to
fantastic.
fall prey to.
Yeah, yeah. Even just standing in the window, like posing for her, like
Mm-hmm.
it's easy for us to say, yeah, look, she's peeping on her, but what if it was deliberate? What if she knew she did that? So she was posing just for her in this time. She gets off on this power that she has. Like, if that were the twist and reveal and it turns out she's evil, like, I'd be so into that. That'd be great.
Yeah, yeah. That would be like whatever angel became the devil. I can't remember the name, but
Lucifer?
yeah, I guess
Yeah,
I
who
think of like
who
Hasatan.
fell from heaven. Okay, yeah. I was thinking, yeah, obviously of Lucifer, the probably most well-known angel to become the devil,
Right.
and then in John Milton's Paradise Lost, who people seem to think is the Bible, weirdly, his famous quote of like, "I'd rather rule in hell than be a slave in heaven." I'm paraphrasing, but it's a great quote, and I think it feels like there's something to this here as well. Like this whole idea that if she is this anglerfish, she is the real devil, and Sasha is not. Sasha thinks she is, or we're made to think she is because of the descriptors, and Chastity is the real devil. And maybe that's the hint. Like Chastity, we're meant to think, oh yeah, look at her name; it's very obvious. But she's really the evil one, and in reality, Sasha, whose name is more subtle, is meant to be the secret good character. We
Yeah.
learn later, but
Yeah, it
maybe that's it. I
works.
think you cracked it. I think it works. I
Mm-hmm.
think you cracked it. It's too bad because, like, in a year later, basically in 2013, Nicely Done totally says he totally forgot about the story,
Yeah.
which is crazy. Totally forgets about it, and he's on to Blood Money, and he didn't even like the characters in this story. He says too much, and you're like, wow, why you do us dirty like that?
Yeah, it was so good.
Disrespect.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, it's a
yeah,
shame, but
it
I mean,
is.
it happens. So,
It does. Yeah.
and so now for my segment, you know it, Hans. But for any new listeners, when discussing realism in stories, I have a question I like to pose. Out of the four Earths I'm about to describe, which do you believe feeling the fire until it burns falls under? So we have realistic Earth, where Earth is normal as we live it every day. Alternate Earth, where Earth is changed to some degree, mainly focusing on wedgies. Idealistic Earth, where Earth is changed to fit the desires of the wedgie community or some aspect of it, depending on the writer. Or fantastical Earth, where Earth is changed to be unrecognizable, like Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons, and can also be a mix of those four, change between them, or be none at all and be something entirely different.
Yeah, I'm kind of split on this one because let me put aside the idea of it being super biblical because from a glance we can look at it and I wonder if it's realistic Earth. An example where I like even suspending some of the slight disbelief around the fact they're giving each other these wedgies and Chastity is so into it. Even that I could put on to like it feels kind of good physically, as we know, to get wedgies, and plus Sasha's clearly into them, so she's maybe just like doing them for her, and she's just having fun, and that's kind of like their thing. I wonder if that maybe is enough to look at that and say it's kind of realistic. Like they hang out, they don't do any crazy bonkers wedgies. It's just two people in a house there. She's in a tree. She falls out the tree. She's kind of injured. Like it feels like it could be a realistic story. I mean, the stuff that happens, obviously, like I said, it's a bit of a stretch maybe, cause she's peeping from a tree, and that's it happens, but it's kind of rare, and like she's brought to the house, and she doesn't really ask how she landed there or what happened, and like there's no real like interrogation around why did you fall out my tree, any of that stuff. So it might be a stretch, but I want to say realistic because beyond some of those points that stretch it, it feels like the story's kept pretty down to earth. Pun intended, if it is a tell heaven thing. And I guess before I end that thought, the reason I say I'm kind of torn is because if I look at it from this lens of like religion, angels, demons, the whole thing's a dream, it becomes like the rare fantastical story we've talked about. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
kind of like split, right?
Hmm.
Kind of, I don't know if down the middle, but I am split. And I don't know if I want to argue full on. It's fantastical. I could and say like, yeah, it's like they're heaven and it's hell and they're angels and they're actual demons and like whatever, like in the romantic sense of it.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I'm kind of confused. I need you to lay it out for me which world it is.
Hmm. Depending on, okay, I could see that two different interpretations, and so depending on which
Yeah.
one you go with, that would determine it. I thought I was gonna have the hot take here with going with realistic Earth, but apparently not, because that's what I think it is. I the only things that are shown to happen in the outside world in a location that's not private are things that would very realistically and naturally happen.
Yeah.
Um, and then the only things that might be considered maybe not so realistic are the wedgies, but they're in a very private place between two people who one very clearly enjoys it and the other one is showing kind of obvious signs that she is. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's unrealistic either. I mean, there's plenty of people who like wedgies. I mean, it's bound to happen that two people find each other who also like them. I don't, and then do it in private. That's I don't see how that can't be realistic.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I think the angel and devil, heaven and hell interpretation is, I think that's much more of a um, metaphorical interpretation. I don't think it's necessarily reflecting on what's actually happening.
Yeah.
I think it more so is just uh, an allegorical interpretation.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that is that something that you can agree with?
I don't know. I think you're right. I think it's certainly like a layer and interpretation. We don't have evidence yet, of course, that
No.
like that's exactly what's happening and they are trapped in heaven or hell. So, yeah, it's we can. I'm fine to look at it like as a realistic story, and then it has these cool tones and themes and motifs that uh could be opening to something else, but we don't know, which I think we like and have said that's kind of one of the main like selling points of the story, so to speak, that's open like that.
Hmm. Yeah. Very nice. So is there anything else you'd like to discuss?
I don't think so. I think as always you covered a lot and very well. I think as always people should read the story.
Yeah.
I think Nicely Done's catalog, short that it is rather significant. I mean, since I interviewed them years back, they've been writing a bit more now and have some great art on DeviantArt as well. So maybe we can bug them about feeling the fire until it burns and they'll continue it. You never know, it's possible.
Maybe,
So
maybe.
we might do that. But go check them out if you aren't already. Um, and just keep reading, keep writing, and keep thinking about stuff like this. And
Yeah.
let me know what you thought in the comments below about feeling the fire. If you think there's something to my heaven hell metaphor, or if you think I've lost it, let me know.
I like how you're saying leave comments. Like it's, oh, that's funny to me. Um, Okay. Do you have anything you'd like to promote?
No, I'm still working away on some stuff. I found, as we were talking, a document with 30 pages for this quote unquote interactive story, which would have incredibly limited interactivity, where you just choose what room to go into, and I think maybe to what wedgies, about a character moving through the stages of grief. I might see if I could just post that as is, these 30 pages. It looks like a lot of blah, blah, blah. This was like post 2018, I think, or pre 2018. I was writing this. That was the last time I had a note. So I might just post it, and if you want to hit your head against some walls, it looks like you can do that. But it looks like there's some very detailed wedgies. So maybe keep an eye out for that. I'll try to take out some of my random notes, which are just like, and then I can do this. I don't know how cool that would be. Unless people would want like a super, like, here's a rough draft with some detailed wedgie scenes, but
Hmm.
also a lot of notes I had for where the story could go. I don't know what readers would like
Hmm.
generally. But it looks like some decent stuff from a beginning writer who liked to hear himself talk a lot. It looks like a lot of stuff about books and stuff
Hmm.
and dreaming and things. Well, we'll see. So there's that. Just in general, keep reading. Read Fortunate Events again if you've already finished it since the last time I told you to read it. And let me know who's good, who you're reading right now, who I should check out. So I know who I can promote next episode
Yeah.
if I'm invited back.
Yeah, if. I think that, yeah, there's really a question there, huh? Okay. And so ends another first rate discussion with Hans Gutherson. Thank you so much for coming on.
So great to be back. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be good to see you next episode as well.
Yay!
Now, if there are any topics, stories, ideas, etc., that you'd like to hear me discuss, or if you'd like to come on for an episode, leave a comment or send me a message on DeviantArt or Lucky Fetish as Nufatora. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club.